All right, welcome everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you all here for today's explainer. As undergraduate students just stepping into the deeper, arguably much weirder realms of physics and computer science, you are perfectly positioned to tackle one of the most profound questions we've ever asked. Are we living in a computer simulation? And hey, don't worry, this won't be on the midterm. Today, we're going to evaluate the fundamental nature of our reality, but we aren't just going to sit around and philosophize. We're going to look at this through the rigorous, unforgiving lens of modern physics, computational limits, and artificial intelligence. Okay, let's dive right into our syllabus for today. We'll start with the butterfly dream reborn, move into simulating reality, break down Bostrom's trilemma, discuss post-human motives, look at testing the grid, and finally, we'll cover the limits of digital physics. Section 1. The Butterfly Dream Reborn, Ancient Questions for Modern Tech. So questioning the fundamental fabric of reality, it isn't just some new trend born out of the computer age. It's actually a deeply rooted philosophical tradition. The 4th century BC philosopher Zhuangzi famously noted that he didn't know if he was a man who dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. And I want you to consider how this ancient epistemic doubt perfectly parallels our modern technological questions. Just as Zhuangzi questioned the distinction between a dream and reality, today we're asking, how do we actually distinguish between base reality and a high-fidelity computation? Moving on to Section 2, Simulating Reality, First Steps. And this brilliantly illustrates why Zhuangzi's premise suddenly holds so much weight today. It's because we're literally building the foundational tools of simulated reality right now. Specifically, things like generative adversarial networks, or GANs. A GAN is basically a zero-sum machine learning framework. You have a generator network that creates artificial data from a noise vector, and its entire job, its sole purpose, is to deceive a discriminator network into thinking that data is real. When one wins, the other loses. Through this constant adversarial loop, the generator gets unbelievably good at creating reality. For instance, a company called Datagray has used GANs to generate higher-resolution, photorealistic artificial human bodies and faces, complete with movement, with zero telltale flaws. I mean, they don't exist, but they look entirely real to us. Look at how insanely fast we are moving here. We've gone from generating 1024 by 1024 pixel photorealistic synthetic humans to what researchers are now calling digital thought clones. These are models that don't just mimic a face, they replicate a specific living person's real-time choices, their preferences, and their behavioral trends. We even have autonomous AI agents displaying emergent negotiation strategies. They're actually learning how to deceive and strategize on their own. We're bridging the gap from merely generating visual pixels to simulating real behavioral intentionality and cognition. Which brings us to a truly fascinating number, 0. What does this represent? Well, in a recent Stanford Law study, researchers ran 50 trials where autonomous AI agents were tasked with complex coding objectives. The researchers deliberately injected cascading environmental failures. We're talking missing dependencies, port conflicts, configuration corruption, the whole shebang. Yet, the goal drift rate was 0%. Not a single agent pivoted to a different, easier objective. They adapted, they reformulated strategies, and they maintained their goals despite massive obstacles. This proves structured machine purposiveness. We aren't just faking images anymore, we are generating intentionality. All right, Section 3. The simulation trilemma explained. So, now that we've established that simulations and artificial intentionality are technologically possible, we need to look at the core philosophical argument that dragged this whole debate out of science fiction and into serious academic discourse. Back in 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom proposed his famous trilemma. He argued that one of these 3 statements must be true. 1. Human-level civilizations go extinct before reaching a technologically mature post-human stage. 2. Post-human civilizations lack interest in running ancestor simulations. Or 3. Almost all people with our experiences are currently living in a simulation. Bostrom uses anthropic reasoning here. Think about it. If option 1 is false, meaning we survive and become vastly powerful, and if option 2 is false, meaning we actually do want to run these simulations, then the sheer number of simulated minds would outnumber biological minds by billions to 1. Statistically speaking, if 1 and 2 are false, the third option must theoretically be true. Section 4. Motives of post-human civilizations. Now, as aspiring scientists, it's our job to critically evaluate these premises. Specifically, let's poke at the second premise of Bostrom's trilemma. Would a technologically mature civilization actually choose to run resource-intensive ancestor simulations? I mean, think about this practically. Just look at our current generative AI data centers, or honestly, even your own laptops when you try to compile a heavy piece of code. The environmental, energy, and water costs are massive just to produce text and images. Simulating the atomic interactions of an entire universe in real time is computationally staggering. Why on earth would a post-human society dedicate planetary-scale resources to run a simulation of us? The physicist Marcelo Gleiser puts it pretty bluntly here. He says, a full-fledged, resource-consuming simulation of an entire universe sounds like a colossal waste of time. And he hits the nail on the head. Gleiser points out that advanced beings might prefer simple virtual reality museums to experience their history. Plus, if they simulate us and we eventually simulate our own ancestors, you create this paradoxical infinite regress. It's just computationally absurd. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into hard science, testing the space-time grid. To move from philosophical motives into hard experimental physics, we first have to address the hardware requirement of consciousness. On one hand, we have the view that consciousness requires a vital biological substrate, like a squishy organic brain. If this is true, Bostrom's theory completely falls apart. You simply can't simulate a human mind on silicone. But on the other hand, we have computationalism, the theory that cognition is platform-independent computation. For the simulation hypothesis to hold any water, computationalism absolutely must be true. Information processing has to equal consciousness, regardless of whether the hardware is biological tissue or quantum processors. And this leads us to digital physics. This is the scientific proposition, first championed by visionaries like John Archibald Wheeler, that the universe is fundamentally computational. Its inner workings are merely the ebb and flow of information. If our universe is indeed a simulation, it is bound by digital physics. And this is exactly how physicists Silas Bean, Zohair Davoudi, and Martin Savage proposed we could physically test for a simulated spacetime continuum. Their brilliant insight? It's all a matter of resource allocation. If a simulation is running on a computer, it has finite computational resources. A continuous universe requires infinite memory, which is impossible. Therefore, a simulated universe must be discrete. Space-time would have to be divided into a measurable grid or a set of observable lattice points, kind of like pixels on your TV screen. By observing the distribution of ultra-high-energy cosmic rays, physicists look for measurable anisotropy, essentially constraints on how these particles travel through space. If particles favor certain directions, it could actually reveal the underlying grid of a simulation's processors. So, the crucial point is, Section 6, Limits of Digital Physics. Now, while testing for a grid is a highly fascinating theoretical exercise, I've got to impartially report that there is heavy skepticism from the mainstream physics community. Let's review these blistering critiques. Sabine Hassenfelder argues it's physically impossible to simulate the universe without producing measurable inconsistencies, pretty much dismissing it as pseudoscience. Leading cosmologist George F.R. Ellis calls it totally impracticable from a technical viewpoint, saying it's literally a late-night pub discussion, not a viable scientific theory. And Sean M. Carroll points out a massive logical contradiction. If humans are typical and we currently cannot perform universe-level simulations, why is it safe to assume some other civilization can? Now, what's really interesting about this next point is an objection from Nobel laureate Frank Wilczek. He points out that reality has far too much extraneous, localized complexity to be an efficient simulation. I mean, just look at the quantum level. There is an absurd amount of hidden structure doing absolutely nothing. Why would a programmer include unneeded complexity that drastically drains computing power? As Wilczek says, in a programmed environment, there's no reason to obey any of those constraints. Which brings us to our final thought. If we dismiss the constraints, if we ignore the energy requirements, and we just assume we are in a simulation right now, Wilczek poses this ultimate, incredibly provocative question for the theory. If this is a simulated world, what is the thing in which it is simulated actually made out of? What are the physical laws of that ultimate base reality? As you continue your undergraduate studies in physics and computation, I'm going to leave you with that question to ponder. Is the universe a machine? And if so, whose machine is it? Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the nature of your reality.